Now, the U.S. midterms are officially over, and the divided win is doing wonders for our rand. The Democrats have taken control of the House of Representatives, while the Republicans won the Senate by a bigger margin. Before we talk about how this all affects us here in South Africa, let's get the latest from the United States. We'll start with William Denselow in New York. Will President Trump speaking a little earlier, still claiming victory despite losing control of the House?
Yeah, Shahan, speaking to the press, President Donald Trump said that the gains seen by the Republicans in the Senate defied history. Of course, this comes after the last three presidents all suffered heavy losses in the midterm elections. President Trump saying that the Republicans were able to do this despite the Democrats spending far more money across the US in these various midterm races, without the endorsement of celebrities such as Oprah Winfrey going to states and campaigning heavily in places like Georgia that saw the Republicans win narrowly, it must be said, but still holding on to those positions of power. So that's seen as huge successes. President Trump also saying there were huge gains seen at the more local level, winning, doing very well in a few very tight gubernatorial races there as well. President Trump actually saying that he thought that this was the best case scenario in many ways, the fact that Democrats did have a larger majority of the House, which means that President Trump says he's very optimistic that he can work across and reach across the other side of the political aisle to start working with Democrats on bringing some meaningful legislation to the United States.
So, of course, Trump will stay Trump, but how likely are Republicans to blame him for Tuesday's losses?
Well, essentially, President Trump speaking at this press conference had a very clear message. That was that in states that he visited before the elections, of course, he campaigned across the US in a very busy couple of weeks of campaign rallies. He says those candidates did better than those that either didn't want him or that he wasn't able to make it to their particular states to fight and put his say on those particular races. He actually incredibly came out and, speaking to the media, said that he wasn't sure whether to be happy or sad that some of those Republicans that chose not to have President Trump come campaign with him, whether he's happy or sad that they indeed went on to lose. So that really shows, I think, in many ways the fractious nature that the Trump presidency is having across the US and is having on the Republican Party, that depending where you are in the country, he's seen as having a huge uplifting effect for your campaign and your hopes in these types of elections, or he could have the adverse effect. So this very interesting to see, of course, as this will continue in the next couple of years, as of course we head towards the presidential election. But at this midterms, President Trump very much putting himself in many ways on the ballot paper by saying that votes for Republican candidates across the country was a vote for him, and President Trump certainly painting it as a victory for himself as well as the Republican Party. Of course, the Democrats very much coming out and saying that the Trump effect had very much the opposite impact on the US voters.
Yeah, now Democrats, of course, celebrating their victory in the House as well. What does it mean for them? What kind of power do they actually have over the president now?
Well, essentially, this isn't perhaps the blue wave that many were talking about and maybe hoping for. Of course, it was always seen by analysts that there was a very slim chance that Democrats would take control of the Senate as well. That, of course, didn't happen. But what was seen as the banker for the Democrats was winning the House. That, of course, has happened. That means that they now have at least a foothold in the three major branches of government in the United States. That means they now have they have the power to put forward their own legislative agenda. Now, we've heard from Nancy Pelosi, who's tipped to be the House Speaker, of course, representing the Democrats. She said it was an opportunity to vote for voters to speak, that they want Democrats to have their say in the legislative process, speaking out on issues such as healthcare. Of course, Pelosi has already spoken to Mitch McConnell, the leader of the Senate on the Republican side, saying they want to work particularly close together on issues such as infrastructure in the US. President Trump also saying that he's very willing to work on issues such as infrastructure in the US, such as lowering drug prices, with the Democrats. So signs there of potential collaboration, but of course Democrats also very vehemently against President Trump's plans for things like immigration. Expect more rebuttals there as far as the Democrats are concerned. They also have now the power for subpoenas, so very interesting to see how this will play out given the context of the Mueller investigation and these allegations of any potential collusion between the Trump campaign and the Russians, of course, something that President Trump has vehemently and repeatedly denied.
Yeah. Now, people, of course, playing the biggest role in any election. What's the feeling on the ground?
Well, essentially, I think for many Democrats, there's certainly a slight degree of relief that, of course, considering back 2 years ago in the presidential race, many Democrats were thinking that a win for Hillary Clinton would be a surefire thing. That, of course, didn't happen. There was a huge amount of shock across the country that the preemptive polling and all that data, all that research happened to be wrong, and they got it wrong by such a huge margin. So there's certainly a degree of relief from Democrats that, at least as predicted by many, they at least controlled the House. They now have a say in these branches of government. They will now have the chance to get some of their policies, some of their agendas across, and also be somewhat of a check on the president and the Republican Party. For the Republicans, it also shows that the support base for Donald Trump is alive, kicking, and indeed thriving in huge parts of the country. There were some major contested races, such as Texas, which was seen as a huge possibility of swinging the Democrat way. That race was very close, but Ted Cruz did hang on against the challenger, Beto O'Rourke. So a contest like that went in favour of the Republicans. So that'll certainly be seen as a huge sign, a huge victory for Republicans, considering they're up against this so-called blue wave.
Well, before I let you go, let's sidetrack for a little bit. President Trump has asked Attorney General Jeff Sessions to resign, effectively firing him. What's happening there?
Absolutely monumental in the United States and in the greater case and backdrop of the Trump presidency. Of course, let's not forget that Jeff Sessions was the first senator back in February 2016 to endorse Donald Trump for the presidency. So he has been a long-standing proponent of Donald Trump. But of course, when he was made Attorney General, things soured very quickly indeed. Jeff Sessions removed himself from the Russia investigation. That, of course, was met with huge fury from President Trump, saying that it was ridiculous that his Attorney General wasn't weighing in on a matter of this magnitude. Of course, just at this press conference given just a few hours ago, President Trump was asked about the future of Jeff Sessions. He said he wasn't willing to discuss it then and there, but of course in a tweet just an hour or so after putting forward that Jeff Sessions would be replaced. Of course, interesting also to note as a side note that it's not even Jeff Sessions' deputy, Mr. Rosenstein, that's taking over in this temporary role. That interesting in itself, because Mr. Rosenstein himself has come out and stated that he believed that Robert Mueller shouldn't be removed from heading this probe into this alleged Russian meddling. So that itself is significant. Of course, the timing, many Republicans had urged President Trump, according to reports, that he shouldn't go ahead and remove Jeff Sessions before the midterms because of the optics. So very interesting that he decides to make this decision just the day after the midterm elections.
Yeah, it is. Thanks so much for that. Appreciate it. William Denselow in New York. Let's go